minutes left in debate, so I'll recognize the honourable member for Newton North Delta.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's my pleasure today to continue the points I started to make yesterday. And once again, I want to express my concern that this particular piece of legislation is being presented under public safety, when the bill actually deals with immigration and citizenship. And I feel that this is a real issue. Since when have we as Canadians began to see the arrival of immigrants into this country as a public safety issue? It is imperative, and I urge the government to put this to the Committee of Immigration and Citizenship as this bill goes through its readings. Yesterday, I also mentioned very briefly the impact this would have on families. We as Canadians pride ourselves on being compassionate and caring, and the world looks to Canada to be compassionate and caring. People right across the world choose to make Canada their home. I, as a first-generation immigrant, came from England and chose Canada to be my home. And one of the reasons I chose Canada is because of its inclusivity and its acceptance of people from around the world. But here in this legislation, Madam Speaker, I feel that we are going in the wrong direction. We are sending a message to refugees who have spent, some of them, years in war-torn territories, running for their lives, separated from their families, not knowing where their next meal is going to come from, and some of them not even knowing where they're going to be sleeping the next day or whether they're going to wake up alive or how many of their loved ones they're going to have lost. Now we're telling those refugees that when they arrive in Canada, what we're going to do is we're going to take up to a year examining their designation. And during that time, they will be in isolation. And once they have been designated, and they're being designated by this special category, for which criteria is not clear at all, and seems to be a lot of power vested in the minister, and once again, a lot of smoke and mirrors, when we don't know what the criteria is. Once again, once they are being designated, then we're telling them for 5 years, maybe 6, you will not get to apply for permanent residence. What does this mean? This means for individuals who arrive here, who've already been torn from their families, who have already suffered enough, we're now telling them that they will get no travel documents. Yes, they'll be able to work, but they won't have any of the rights. They won't have permanent residence. And for 5 or 6 years, we're throwing their lives into further turmoil of uncertainty, not knowing if the families they've left behind will ever be able to come and join them, not being able to have that mental relief that all of us need from saying, yes, I have arrived in a safe haven. They will not have that, Madam Speaker. And just think what that must feel like. Imagine a young woman who's left with 2 children. She arrives here. Her husband, in the meantime, and 2 other kids are still back in Somalia. I'm just using that as an example. For 5, well, up to 6, 7 years, she cannot apply for permanent residence or apply for her family to come and join her. So what are we saying to her? A, yes, we're going to provide you with this vacuum for 5 or 6 years, but you don't have any of the rights. You can't apply for permanent residence. And by the way, permanent residence doesn't arrive the day you apply for it. That takes time as well. So then imagine the amount of time she will have to wait to have the rest of her family join her. We could be looking at 10 to 15 years, depending on how we do our math and how long it takes. Surely that's not the kind of Canada, the Canadian image, we want to project to the rest of the world. We want the rest of the world to see us as compassionate and caring. And by creating those two levels of refugees and denying appeal in that first year, what we're really saying is we are prepared to break conventions governing the rights of refugees and governing the rights of children. And that really concerns me as a Canadian, and I know Canadians right across this country will be concerned about that. We pride ourselves on our family values. We pride ourselves on being a welcoming nation. So I urge this House not to support this bill because we are sending a message to the world that we are becoming a much colder and less caring nation when we look at legislation like this going through. And you know, then I looked through to see who is actually opposed to this legislation. And there's the Canadian Council for Refugees. I actually talked to some of my own constituents. I phoned some of them, and they said, this is ridiculous. It's not a problem. If we're worried about smugglers, we already have a life sentence for smugglers, and in Canada, that's the highest penalty we can give. So this is actually more punishment for people who have already suffered atrocities and difficulties that most of us in this chamber cannot even imagine. As a councillor, I've had the privilege of working with children who've arrived here as refugees after years in detention camps or in very, very, I would say, unsafe and volatile living conditions. And I can tell you that dealing with those children is extremely challenging. Now we're leaving those same children out in a vacuum for 5, 6, 7, and maybe even longer years. So once again, I look at the Canadian Council for Refugees being opposed to this. Amnesty International, the Canadian Civil Liberties have taken a position, Canadian Bar Association, Centre for Refugee Studies. And you know what the word that keeps coming up over and over again? What a draconian piece of legislation. So I urge all members in this House to look at what is it that we're trying to address. If we're trying to address the smugglers, let's focus on enforcement, provide extra resources, and let's go after the smugglers. Let's not punish people who have already been victimized. And let us all put our own selves in the position of a refugee. Just for a second, imagine that. And imagine how you would feel. You've got to a safe haven called Canada, and now you're in Canada, and you've got a detention ahead of you and uncertainty. Please defeat this bill.
Questions and comments?